Starting a lawnmower should be easy. In fact, it should only take a slow pull on the rope for it to start. You shouldn't have to be in your prime physical condition to start one. So what happens if you need a little help getting your mower started then? Well, I guess you might want to start considering getting a mower with electric start. But if you do, you could run into some common problems just like this one has. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt lawnmower. And the problem is that the electric start doesn't work, so we need to find out why and hopefully fix it. But the biggest issue is that we can't break the bank trying to do it. This mower is only worth so much, which means keeping the repair costs low is important. So does every lawnmower need an electric starter? And the answer is, of course not. But once you get used to it, going back to yanking on a rope feels a bit archaic. So the biggest problem with a starting system like this one is, of course, having to maintain it. And just like everything else, you can't just forget about it and then expect it to work years down the road. And what fails on most of these is, of course, the battery, mainly because consumers forget to take care of them. So here's the problem. This battery is not your typical one you would find at your local hardware store or even at the repair shop. You'd have to go to a store dedicated to selling batteries, and even then you might still have to order it. But there's still yet another problem. This mower did not come with a charger. That means even if we had a good battery, we still need to spend money on getting the charger. Now, according to all the information we found on this mower, the stock battery and charger would cost over $120, and that's just for the battery. So it turns out the wall charger is no longer being offered, and if you do find it, it'll be new old stock. So what are we going to do? Simple, we're going to use a cheap power tool battery instead. What's good about this one, besides only being $20, is that it comes with a wall charger. Now you can find a universal battery to replace the stock one for about the same price as this battery, but you'll still need to source a wall charger, which will cost extra, not to mention a hassle as well. So here's the problem I'm having with using this battery, and that is the differences in packaging. Because the batteries are not even remotely the same, we won't be able to just put it in the same area where the old one was. That means we'll have to get creative on where to install it, but I will tell you it's not going to be pretty. So yes, I could take the case apart for the battery, but I'm sure it'll void the warranty on it. Not only that, it might be dangerous for the battery as the case is designed to protect it. So this is where things get kind of ugly, and that's because I've decided to mount the battery right above the box. Not only that, but I also want to make this temporary, which means no screws to hold it in place. I did warn you that this was going to get pretty ugly, so if you want to turn away for the next 60 seconds, be my guest. Now the reason I'm choosing to mount the battery here with zip ties is that if for some reason you choose to go back to stock, there'll be no permanent damage. All you'll have to do is cut the zip ties and mount the new battery back in the box. But if this mower were commercial grade and worth $1,000 on the used market, then doing it correctly would be worth the extra expense. I do want to remind you that the starter system is also untested, so making this temporary makes sense. I just wish it didn't have to look this way, but we'll deal with it later on once we get the system working again. Well, at least that mess won't be visible with the handlebar back in place. That means we finally get to test out the system, but things don't always go the way you want them to. And unfortunately, nothing happened, not even a sound from the starter, and since we didn't get a response from it, we'll need to inspect it. Now this is not surprising. If the starter is unused for a very long time, it could get stuck. And to fix it might mean having to break it free by using force, but being careful not to damage it. The starter is right behind the fuel tank, so I'm choosing to drain out all the gasoline just to make it easier. However, you don't have to do this. The good part is that you don't need to take off any more parts to get access to the starter. Just take off these two bolts and it should come right off. And once the starter is off the engine, turns out the problem is exactly what we thought it was. So you can see some rust on the bottom of the shaft. However, we'll need to look at the other end of the motor as well. And that's because I doubt spraying a lube on this end will be enough to free it. So to get access to the other side of the motor, we'll need to get by the gearbox. Just be careful because if you break it, it'll be incredibly expensive to replace. After that, we'll just take off the metal cover over the gears, and what we find is a bit surprising. From what I'm seeing, grease must be in short supply there because there's really not that much in here. And even looking at the gear set, there isn't much in there. I don't expect it to be full of grease, but I was hoping to see at least twice as much as I'm seeing. Now to get better access to the drive gear, we'll take the larger one out with a bit of help, of course. And with it out of the way, you can really see the lack of lubrication and also the rust stain from the shaft as well. So it looks like water was able to get into the gearbox through the shaft for the larger gear. It then collected and pooled around the shaft for the motor and then seized it. So besides putting a seal around the shaft to keep this from happening, a good application of grease to the shaft would have done the same thing, at least for a short time. And with a bit of persuasion, we were able to get the shaft to turn, which should be enough for it to work again. Just be careful doing this because you might end up just making the gear spin on the shaft instead of freeing the shaft. Next, we'll add some extra grease to the gearbox and anywhere else we think it should be at. So could you ever add too much grease to the box? And I'm guessing the answer is yes. I would recommend being reasonable when adding more to it, but I'll leave it up to you to decide on how much. So here's the problem with adding extra features to a lawnmower. You'll always end up with more repairs later on. So if you have an electric starter on your mower, you could end up with battery or starter problems. It's not a question of if and more of when the problems will show up. But you'll never have a problem with the starter or battery if your mower never came with them. So if you want to avoid having to deal with these types of problems, then don't get them to begin with. But if you do somehow end up in the situation, you can do a bit of extra care and keep these problems from even showing up. While I'm here, I'm also going to replace that fuel line that was installed a couple of months ago. It turns out the line we used was not good quality, and even though it hadn't failed, it was deforming at an alarming rate. Just remember to install the fuel line on the carb first before installing the starter because it will be in the way. Also, don't forget to connect the wires to the starter, which is something I've done before. I've also been told to install a good quality fuel filter since there's plenty of room for it, so I'll be taking your advice once it arrives. The red fuel filter that was on the line before is kind of okay, but I ordered one with a real paper media instead. I will let you know that this mower weighs close to 100 pounds, so I'll be testing the starter while it's on the table. That way, if there's still a problem with the system, I won't have to put the mower back onto the table. And luckily for us, the starter worked this time and the engine started and ran without any issues, which is fantastic news. I almost forgot, while it's on the table, I'll also install a used mulch cover. Now just be very careful because without a cover or even a side chute, the mower could throw rocks and break windows, and this is something I would know about. Now I do have to admit, not having to pull on a rope to start it is really nice. In fact, I kind of wish this feature was on my personal mower. But I also don't want to have to worry about maintaining the system either, even though I'm quite capable of doing it. Now to be honest, I'm quite lazy and I'd rather not do extra work if I don't have to. I like the idea of things being simple, and if that means living without electric start, then so be it. However, things do change. I know years ago I could easily push mow my yard, but now I insist on having a working drive system. And who knows, maybe in another 20 years, I might be insisting on getting an electric starter for my gasoline mower. So even though I'm recommending that you pass on getting one of these complicated systems, I might change my mind in the future. But don't worry, in another decade or two, you might see it the same way. So my question is, if you could pick between a mower of your choice, one with electric start and one without it, and they were also the same price, which one would you choose? Now, based on the work that I just did and for the sake of simplicity, I'd say pass. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.